I reckon it's taken a couple of days for everything to sink in. Yes, we've finally beaten India after 27 years. And yes, we did it against a very strong Indian outfit, just barring the absence of Jasprit Bumrah, Hardik Pandya, and Jadeja. And yes, India somehow managed to pull off a Sri Lanka in that first ODI. And capitulations, etc., seem quite contagious when you come to this part of the world. But to digest all this and to discuss and review the Sri Lanka versus India ODI series, it's our greatest honor and privilege to have Madushka Balasuriya joining us for the very first time. Thank you, Madushka, for taking your time to be with us. As someone
Thanks for
who's
having me.
grown up following your content on Cricinfo, it's an honor to have you on board, and we look forward to
Grown
getting your
up,
take on
grown
everything.
up following my content. Jeez, man. I don't know how much. I don't know what the gap is between us, but I don't think it's that much. But yeah, thanks
Fair
so
enough,
much.
but you're an
Thanks
inspiration
for,
to many of us. So thank you.
thanks for
Thank
having
you
me.
for joining us. And Arvindan, who's joined us before, thanks, Arvindan, for coming on board once again. I was very impressed by your write ups, uh, previewing the series, during the series, and in its aftermath. There was a nice sense of sarcasm, an undertone of sarcasm in most of your writing. And we could all relate to it after that victory the other day. And I'm going to go straight into it. Manushka, as a Manchester United fan, we know of the rivalry with the noisy neighbours, the David and Goliath encounters. And I think that was a parallel here with the Sri Lanka India series as well. No, after the T20 drubbing, no one really expected us to pull off an upset of this kind in the ODI series, especially against a very strong Indian outfit. So my first question to you is: A, what was your take, A, as a Sri Lankan cricket fan, and B, as an analyst on the series victory?
Um, thanks for having me, Viren. It's nice to be here. Just getting into it, I think as Sri Lankan cricket fans, because the highs and the lows can be so polarizing, we tend to get really bogged down in the recency of the results, right? And we and I think in cricket in general, there's a bit of that with a lot of fan bases and a lot of even folks in the media. If you take India in the build up to the 2023 World Cup, I think they went to Zimbabwe and they were trying a lot of different combinations, and they 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 didn't really win that much. But Dravid was just like, listen, we're just trying things out. Results don't matter, and he was getting a lot of flack for that. But then, as you saw at the World Cup, yes, they lost to Australia in the final, but they were probably the best team at that tournament. If you just took performances on their merit, and I think with Sri Lanka, I've seen the posts going around where we have this really exemplary home record in ODIs, right? We've beaten so many sides, and it's a really impressive, very strong home ODI front. But no one was really talking about this before. Like, okay, we won 8 series, but no one was talking about it when we won 7 series, right? Because it's the thing with a lot of discourse in the media. I wouldn't say the fans. The fans, fans are going to be fans, right? Like you said, as a Manchester United fan, I understand. I meet so many fans who are like can be reactionary, who can be like they take time off from the game if they're so upset. These things happen, but I think in terms of actual discourse on social media, on Twitter and all that, maybe we don't necessarily analyze the big picture as much, because this result wasn't, to me, yes, it was a pleasant surprise, but I don't think it should have been, because we have been very good, especially at playing at Kettarama, when we put the spinners into play. That slow strangle, it's a stereotype and cliche for a reason in terms of how we win when we play at the Kettarama. So that is something I think we probably should have maybe kind of expected that India might struggle with this. Um, and the second thing is that my biggest takeaway from this is just the role of um, momentum and the psychology behind it. Because I don't know if you all noticed it, but in that first T20I, when Jaiswal and Ko came out to bat, the way they were batting against us, it seemed like they were playing with such confidence. It didn't seem like a contest. It seemed like, oh, where are the batters? You're the net bowlers. We're just gonna come. Like they would sweep us. They didn't really have much trouble with our bowlers. And yes, the wickets were very suited to that style of play. But I mean, this is obviously just guesswork, but I think if we had managed to pull through in that chase in the first ODI, because we had a great platform, I think if we had managed to pull through in that chase, I think psychologically that would have made India's batting in the next. They would have doubted themselves, that a little bit of doubt, because they would have been like, it's not about just scoring 200. It's about, oh wait, these guys can chase 200. That means we need to score 200. And now all of a sudden those doubts creep in. You get a little bit more stiff on your stroke play, right? You're not as loose. And then for our guys, the confidence is, it's the other way around, where it's like, oh yeah, we've done this before, we can do this again. And that's kind of how that snowball effect takes place. And you saw that in the ODIs, because India weren't really struggling to chase that down in that first game, but then suddenly they lost a bunch, right? Because AXA and Co had that chase in hand. There was really no problem. And then suddenly they lost a bunch. It was and it was a it was a collapse of epic proportions. And then the next one and the next one, you just knew every time they came out to bat, that was in their heads. And suddenly, the things they did well, like Rohit was saying, they weren't sweeping well enough. But why were they not utilizing it as much? Why was that doubt there? Because probably, I mean, it's not like they don't sweep. We saw that they could do that very effectively in the T20Is. Sure, there were certainly different batters, but it's not like it's beyond them. It's just that it's in sport. Sometimes when you're in it and the pressure is on, all of a sudden you don't make the optimal choices. You revert to maybe things that you're comfortable with, which is going back, trying to play the ball in a reactionary fashion, and then you get caught. And of course, I take nothing away from our bowlers. They knew how to utilize the conditions, and I think Asalanka said it best after the game, which he said, our guys probably have played on these surfaces a lot more in domestic cricket, so they have experience doing that. So they were unequivocally better than India on these surfaces, and I think there's definitely merit in that. So yeah, that's my take on that particular point. Aravind?
Yeah, I think I agree with quite a lot of what Madushka said. But from my perspective, look, before the T20 series, I put out a tweet or a post saying that, I think this series will be 2-1, but I'm not bold enough to say in whose favor. And that's what you probably meant by that, Viren, like a little bit of sarcasm, because within me, I believed, as Madushka said at the start, even at the start of the T20 series, that, we should be able to win it 2-1. But then I went back after the T20 series on that Tuesday night. I looked at that and I was just thinking what was going through my mind when I actually wrote that. But when it came to the one day series, maybe Madushka is a little bit bold to have predicted it. I honestly didn't see that happening, because on paper, you would expect the Indian batters to dominate irrespective of the context or the conditions. But I read something which was quite interesting on Twitter, or rather X, was that, we always consider these Indian players to be absolute monsters of spin bowling. But in recent times, it hasn't been the case. If you remember, in 2016, in the World T20 in 2016, New Zealand beat them at Nagpur, if I guess, in the league stage. Santner picked up 4 wickets, and there have been enough instances where when they have been exposed to spinning conditions, they have crumbled. Because this lot of players haven't grown up playing the Duleep Trophy or the Ranji Trophy. Once they get into international stage, they don't play on those rank turners or Bunsen burners. And many of them don't play Test cricket as well. Most of them, I mean. Uh, so, therefore, as Madushka said, we should have seen those coming. But at the end of the day, it was a brilliant effort from our bowlers to keep the pressure on, make use of the conditions, because we have seen in the past where the conditions have been handed over on a platter to us, and we have just let it slip away from us. So an interesting point, as Madushka said, I think that's a really good point, where you said that in the first game, in the first ODI, after they didn't get through that chase, it was a massive moment for them, because they kind of felt that, the threat is real. And then the funny things happen. As you said, who would have expected this Indian lineup? They don't only have Hardik Pandya from their first choice batting lineup, right? And to crumble repeatedly and not to go past 208 or 10. And most importantly, Madushka and Viren, for me, I look for things which are not actually happening while the action is happening, but in between the action. So one thing that actually stood out for me in this series, it was definitely a surprise that we won. I would have expected us at the start to at least be 2-1. I mean, 2-1 to India at the onset of the tour. But after the T20 series, I mean, I gave up on hope. But I don't know whether you guys noticed, in the third ODI, Kuldeep and Washington Sundar were putting that, that irritating little partnership which was dragging the game a little bit. And I think of Mahesh Dikshana, Kuldeep played a cut shot. Kusal Mendes was excited as always, and everybody thought Asalanka would go for the review, because the game was almost sealed. There was one review left, and you expect any Sri Lankan captain. I'm not talking about any of those who have been in between 2015 and 23, even the likes of Mahela, Sangakkara, Dishan to go and review. Asalanka didn't. And in the first game also, he didn't review that ABW of Hasaranga when Siraj was stuck on the pad. And for me, that was the decisive moment of the series. Had we burnt that review, India would have won that game. And I'm pretty sure you guys would agree that we would not have won this series. Or maybe, things would have been different. So overall, how does it feel? Relieved, number one, because this victory was needed for Sri Lanka, because people were actually getting quite fed up with it. And on the back of that Asia Cup win by the women's team, this was absolutely brilliant. Number two, it, as Madushka said, on these conditions you expect them to do well, which we will dwell upon later. But this, more than anything, buys time for Asalanka and this set of players, at least until the West Indies and the New Zealand home series are done. This will buy them time. And that's what counts at this moment. Time matters, and that's the key takeaway for me from this series.
Insightful takes from both Madushka and Arvindan, and I think this ties in quite nicely. Thank you to everyone tuning in and chipping in the comments thread. Feel free to send your questions across. I completely agree here. I think ever since Ravi Shastri came in as head coach, it was part of his regime and ideology that he wanted to build India's pace bowling department. And we saw them curate pitchers that will benefit their seamers, and that's when you had the golden era of the likes of Bumrah, Shami, Siraj, etc., coming to the fore. And this ties in quite nicely with our next discussion on the conditions at home. I have a very controversial take on this, because there was a lot of discourse on social media midway through this series about how this series win might not have any consequence for Sri Lanka in the long run. It won't leave us in good stead looking ahead to the 2027 World Cup, and that this is just going to be a useless bilateral series win. But my take on this is that this team was lacking confidence that they could notch up victories under their belt. And we saw that in the T20 series as well. In each of the three games, we were in decent enough situations to be able to convert those starts to victories. But there were capitulations across the board. And it got me thinking, as long as we somehow clinch this series, I don't care. It can be square turners, it can be dust bowls at the Premadasa, but we needed to get this series victory under our belt for two reasons. One, to get the fan following back. I think, and it was a tale of two outcomes for me. The last time I was at Premadasa watching a Sri Lanka versus India game, we left by 3 p.m. and we all know which game we are talking about. But this time on Tuesday, as we left clinching that series, you realize that you had a nation behind this team. You had 20 million hearts beating in unison. And I think that was important for us, looking ahead to this England series, a historic England series, the first time we're playing 3 tests away in England, and then having the West Indies and New Zealand coming home. But secondly, and Arvindan and Madushka highlighted this, Asalanka can stamp his brand of authority on this team, which I think is important. I spoke about this after the T20 World Cup. It was a watershed moment for us. It was a moment, it was comparable to England's turnaround post their 2015 World Cup, when Morgan sat down with Trevor Bayliss and dictated his brand of cricket for the next few years, which has kept England's white ball cricket in decent shape. And I think that's what we see with Asalanka. I personally loved the merger between Sanat and Asalanka. I thought there was good synchronization of strategy, planning, and execution. And this is my question to Madushka and Arvindan. When we had our golden generation, when we had the likes of Murali, Sanat, Aravind, etc., I can't remember us curating any other type of strip at home. We were used to curating decent sprint-friendly tracks. Yes, we had players who could adapt in overseas conditions, but that's the second step in the process. We made Sri Lanka / our home grounds a fortress. And I think that should be the first step in our process for kind of salvaging some pride again. So do you all think certain critics are a tad harsh when they say that these conditions won't leave us in good stead going forward?
All right. So that's a loaded question. So I'll try. Okay, so I'm looking at it. There's about 60 minutes on the clock, so I'll try to finish this answer within 5 minutes if I can. Right. So here's what I think. When it comes to cricket, if you go back, to the golden generation, as you speak, between 96 and 2014, cricket as a whole, ODI cricket was the pinnacle, right? T20 cricket wasn't even really thought of for a long time. ODI cricket was the pinnacle. And if you go back to those records, our 398 that we got in 96 was the highest score for ages. When when South Africa hunted down 400, that was considered a miracle, never to be seen again. But then you fast forward to the 2023 World Cup, and 400 was crossed numerous times. Par scores were 350, right? And that these are the metrics we're talking about now. And the reason for that is just one thing and one thing only: it's T20 cricket, right? We've got a generation of players that are coming up where T20 cricket is the cricket that they play the most. And it's the one they value the most. Like, I think Cricinfo had a survey done recently where it showed that when you look at the different age groups, the younger players now value the T20 World Cup higher than they value the ODI World Cup, right? And that's the first time that has changed in terms of perception of players. So when you look at that, the skill sets required to win World Cups during the time of our golden generation and so on, I don't think was necessarily hindered by playing on wickets such as this. Because India had flat wickets for a long time, and we would go there, and even our best generations, we would not get close to them. I think the closest we got was we nearly chased down 400 when there was that agonizing loss in the final over, right? But so many times Dhoni would just come in and just obliterate our bowling, and we would, all of us, not just us, fans from fans from England, fans from Australia, everyone would be like, "Oh my God, flat wickets in India!" Like it's going to be a run fest, and that would be the criticism because you didn't necessarily get so many flat wickets elsewhere. Australia was known for their bouncy tracks. Yes, their batters could play, but there was a lot of seam and movement. England was very good for seam and movement. West Indies similarly so, a bit more Sri Lankan like, bit of sticky surfaces here and there. But really only in India, and I suppose you could argue Pakistan, but they didn't play in Pakistan for a long time, did you see true roads as surfaces. But now the problem is almost everywhere that you're going to be playing a World Cup, you will be coming across these sort of surfaces, right? I mean, it was this last World Cup, the T20 World Cup, which was ironically one of the few that wasn't, because we were playing in West Indies and the US, where they had drop-in tracks. And yeah, if you play a tournament in Sri Lanka, yes, that's a very interesting, like a small aside. the champion, like it'll be very interesting to see what happens when India if they have to play matches at a major tournament in Sri Lanka, in Colombo, because for any team that's a bit of a leveler. And I think the way we speak about it, saying it's a leveler, kind of shows you what it means. It does bring it down. There's definitely merit in being able to play on different tracks, but it's like in tennis. If you want to be considered the best, you got to be good on the faster surfaces, hard court and grass court. If 3 out of the 4 slams are played on clay, everyone would be like, "Oh, you need to be good on clay," and the cricket has just shifted. We pivoted to this. So the argument for me is, yeah, back then, sure, that made a difference, or it didn't make a difference. But here now, we are Nadal on clay. I mean, that maybe not as good as Nadal on clay, but just bear with me for the for the analogy. We are Nadal on clay, but right now everyone else is that they're just the hard court specialists. And if you remember Nadal when he first started off, he dominated on clay. He wouldn't sometimes even make the semifinals on the hard court surfaces. Like Wimbledon also, it took a long time for him to break through, finally get into the finals, and then beating Federer eventually. So that takes time. So it doesn't mean that we are going to get weaker on these surfaces. A lot of our home series will be played on these surfaces, which means we will probably be playing more on these types of surfaces than anyone else in world cricket, because we will have a certain number of home series. But what we shouldn't do is go back from the plan that was put in place at the start of this year, which is to make surfaces elsewhere, Dambulla, Hambantota, Kandy, batting friendly, and we should primarily play all of our T20 cricket on those surfaces. Because if you play T20 cricket on those surfaces, what that's going to do is, you know what, have your home series wins on these surfaces, that's fine. But let our batters play 70% of their cricket on those, and you will see more innings like we saw from Nisanka. Because, like, where did that come from? Nobody knows, but this is where it came from. This is where it came from. So you need to cultivate that, because we got the talent. It's very clear. Our guys are there. They just need the confidence to be able to do that more consistently. So that's where I stand on that.
And Madushka, before we come to Aravind, just a very quick follow-up, a very short follow-up in terms of the brand of ODI cricket we've seen. We spoke about the evolution of ODI cricket. You spoke about how Sri Lanka is like that pre-2008 Rafael Nadal. Going back to 2007, 2008, in ODI cricket, you'd see the pass scores being around 230, 240. As a cricket fan, is it an enjoyable watch? Because I thoroughly enjoyed this series because it was very refreshing. It was a huge throwback to that era of ODI cricket where there was a fairly even contest between bat and ball. Would you like to see ODI cricket being played like this, especially at a time when everyone considers this format to be irrelevant?
1000%. Yes. I mean, I don't, as a fan, like, that is what you want to see in any sport. You want to see equal contest between bat and ball. And this is the best way to sort of cultivate that and put that into a contest, because this is not day 5 goal. I know India made it seem like that because they were just not playing the spin well enough, but it it wasn't just like, it wasn't keeping, like, yeah, the odd ones were keeping low and there was a bit of turn and all, but generally speaking you could navigate it, and there was a certain level of skill that was utilized. Because if you look at some of, like, I was watching the Big Bash League earlier this year, right? And well, what's the guy's name, Fraser McGurk,
Fraser
right?
McGurk, yeah.
Yeah, right. So the way he hits the ball, if you watch it, it's like a golf swing. It's like every single shot that he hits, it doesn't matter where, it's the same swing. And he's only able to do that because he's clearly practiced it so much, but he's able to read the bounce and just bang, bang, bang every shot. That is not what you want every game to be. Yeah, because there was a certain beauty, right? In, like, when we used to watch Sanat play, when we used to watch Sehwag bat, when we used to watch, I mean, if you remember, like, there was a point Imran Nazir was like on fire when he started off. Like, when you had these really top-notch, top-order bats who were hitting at 200 strike rates, just in the first 15 overs, it was something that was like, ooh, we need to go and watch this. But now you could literally, I mean, on a Wednesday afternoon, turn on Dialogue TV, and then you'll probably catch some T20 match somewhere where someone is just annihilating the bowling. The the special nature of such innings have been taken away, right? And on top of that, you also don't get that much in terms of vicious bowling unless you are a freak like Jasprit Bumrah, who's able to manufacture something out of nothing. But yeah, so it's an interesting one. Yeah, I think if we could ideally make every surface like this, sure, do it. But yeah, I don't think that's going to happen.
Fair enough. And Arvind, your take on conditions at home, plus your two key takeaways from this series.
Yeah. So I think since Madushka covered the qualitative aspect of it or the subjective aspect of it, let me put in some numbers. I was interested, I was curious, like, I mean, I was surprised when I read that. Do you know that since the start of 2020, Sri Lanka's win-loss record at home is 2.4. 2.4 wins per one loss. And that's not the point here. That is the second best win-loss record Sri Lanka has recorded at home since the 1990s. In 1990s, they recorded 2.5. So that team, when Sanath was at his absolute peak and the rest were just coming through, recorded 2.5 wins per one loss. Whereas this, since 2020, where we have been like absolutely pathetic, right? With all due respect, we think so, is 2.4. And that is better than the record that we had in 2000s and 2010s when the likes of Sangakkara, Mahela, Malinga, everybody was at its prime. But here's the catch. Our win-loss record, when it translates to the overseas conditions during this same time, is 0.2, which basically means we lose 5 games to win 1 game. So what they imply, this was actually on a Wisden article which was recent, which came up, I think, today. Some Ramesh Iyer or somebody had articulated the impact of Sri Lanka's win over India. He says the teams that were in the past were smart enough to figure out when they went abroad or overseas conditions, irrespective of the conditions, to figure out a way to bridge that gap. This team, unfortunately, and mainly due to batters, I would say, because our bowling units have never been tested on those conditions. Because, I mean, when your batters don't put up runs or fall like nothing, your bowlers don't have a chance. So we need to figure out a way. And to figure that way out, what's the best way to go forward? You shouldn't put your strengths all out. I think what Madushka put out was a brilliant example. First of all, I understand the logistical issues of having series in multiple venues, but we should go back to the trend of having games at least in 2 venues. If it's a 5-match series, 3 venues where you have all types of conditions. You have bring the opponent, be 2-1 back when it's 3, bat on flat tracks of Dambulla and Pallekale. You are 2-1, come to Ketarama, strangle them on square turners. That's okay. But what we shouldn't become is what Bangladesh became. We shouldn't have everywhere like Mirpur, Chittagong, or everywhere the balls turn square. You win 4-1, 5-0, go outside the country and you become a laughing stock. We shouldn't do that. And that leads us to another question that we discussed about, like, where would you want cricket to be? And I think you both would agree that Ashwin is one of the most profound thinkers of the game in recent times. And he put out a tweet, right? If you are from the slam bang generation, which looks at Fraser McGurk go after every delivery for 6 and like is excited by that, you wouldn't like this. But if you are somebody who is in love with the game, who loves the skill, the competencies, the nitty-gritties and different aspects, you would love it. I mean, Viren, Madushka, I never watch highlights, to be very fair. But trust me, every single time I have seen this series, especially when India were batting, not because we won, I love that strangle, death by spin. It's beautiful. Yeah. And that's where cricket is failing, in my opinion, because if you go back to the golden era, that 434, even today we cherish, right? Why? Because that was a one-off event. And now probably you don't want to switch on the channel and probably like what's happening in England. 350 is default. There's no attraction in those type of games. And especially, you would agree that in the past, why Australia was a very difficult place, or why you judge players for the way they played or their caliber by their records in Australia, was that Sydney was a different wicket. Waka was a different wicket. In Gabba, where we always end up playing our first games, the ball, I mean, from a good length comes up to throat level. And then you have absolute belters in Adelaide. And that's how the global game should be. And for some reason, I do not know. That's why the slam bang is for T20. Let it be, as Madushka said, play your T20s where 200, 240, 260. Let it be the norm. Nobody cares about it. But the ODI cricket has to cater to that segment, which is going to look for the mix between T20 and Test. And, would you rate anybody in this modern era as good as Sanath or Shevag? I mean, Shevag butchered us for many reasons. But he was an absolute maverick, right? Like, he was a marvel to watch. On those Kettarama wickets, Madushka, Viren, I'm unsure about Viren's age, but I hope Madushka would have watched this. But in 2005, you remember that Indian Oil Asia Cup final where he took Dilhara Lukuhetige to the cleaners
Oh
on a
yeah,
26 runs. That's
yeah.
what cricket should be. So, answering the first part of the question, Viren, I don't think we should go to town with the conditions, because at this point it was smart from whoever who decided to come up with these wickets, because we needed that. The last thing this team, Sri Lankan cricket, would have wanted at this time was for India to bat first, or maybe Sri Lanka to bat first, put 270, 280, 300, and then for India to come and chase 3 games on the trot in 45
Yeah.
overs. No. So smart move. Should we continue that? No, we should use it with care. And as Madushka correctly said, I love that idea. Have a mixture of wickets, have this home condition going forward. Make sure that the players develop the skill sets. Now, we saw how Pathum Nissanka has changed his game. I mean, we saw that with the Afghanistan and Zimbabwe series. So the key takeaways from this series is, I think, as I previously said, Viren, give this core a time. Don't play around, meddle around with it, swap too much. Give them consistent opportunities. Number two, the key takeaway, I think this might be a little bit controversial. I would like to think about your thoughts on it, not on the field, but perhaps off the field. What I felt is, we all love Sanath, right? I mean, we love Sanath Jayasuriya. With Sanath Jayasuriya, the cricketer, nothing about it. Sanath Jayasuriya, the administrator, or probably the selector, mixed feelings.
Yeah.
He was instrumental in our downfall, but he was at the helm when we won the World T20, if I'm right, and the 2016 Australia series. But I honestly feel the harm was more than the good. But Sanath, the coach, I don't know whether he has the technical competencies, whether he's right up there with the updates of the game, but you got to give it to him, right? That energy, the vibe that was there on the boundary line. We don't see people often sit on the boundary line, the whole support staff and the team in a T20 game, in a one-day game. They were there, and that vibe translated, and those feelings were quite raw. It was not, there was no optics in it. So the second takeaway, Viren, I don't know whether Sana should be the coach or not. I would be careful when, thinking of having him in the setup as an administrator, but maybe a director cricket role or something. You don't know. The sample size is so small, but at least for the West Indies and New Zealand series, give it a try and see where it takes. Because there's this post which I cannot actually replicate, but what they said is that Sri Lankan cricketers don't understand the language when somebody says, "Come on, guys, let's do it." You need to say that with a Sri Lankan flavor, and if you had seen that meme, you know what it means. But I guess you will buy into that argument. Maybe something is working, so let's see how it goes. So those are the two key takeaways for me, Viren.
You won't bet against three Sri Lankan cricket fans going a tad overboard when it comes to talking about Sri Lankan cricket. But we'll quickly move on to discussing the other half, the Indian side. So I have a final question on the Sri Lankan setup and the Sri Lankan team. Both Madushka and Arvindan highlighted the variances, the peaks and troughs in terms of our performances at home and away. When I was on comms for the Sri Lanka West Indies Women's Series in Hambantota, I said this on air. The wickets in Hambantota are true wickets. wickets that will also test our men's side as well if we do get opportunities to play there. And this is where Arvindan highlighted this, how other teams are able to adapt away. I think the best example I can give you is in Ahmedabad, where you have red soil, black soil wickets in the same venue. You have a variance in terms of conditions on offer in the same venue, in the same ground, which helps test various skill sets of your teams. And that's not something we see here with Sri Lanka cricket. Pallekele is a brilliant batting deck and arguably potentially our finest batting deck. We've seen Dasun Shanaka and Tilakaratne Dilshan thrive in those conditions. So yes, I agree with Arvindan and Madushka. If you have a home series, if you have a decent leg at home, it's important to test our players across conditions, especially given I think ODI cricket will be our best avenue to do that. There is no qualification pathway anymore for the next World Cup. You can afford to have a few losses. You can afford to have a few dead rubbers as well. And in tests, I have no problem with us taking everyone to goal for 2 tests and allowing Prabhat to work his magic. But this bodes quite well with my final question on Sri Lanka cricket in terms of where we see ourselves going in terms of our spin bowling department going forward. And I think there's a pertinent question I have. Jeffrey Van Der Sey has made the comebacks of all comebacks. I think he's proven his critics wrong, silenced all his doubters. And if we are going to go in with a combination of 3 spinners in ODI cricket, I'm assuming Wellalage is a guarantee at number 7. There might be viewers who tuned in who won't agree with me on this, but I think Hasaranga has to feature in our best 11 as well. And my question to both Madushka and Arvindan, before we wrap up the discussion on Sri Lanka cricket, is there scope for us to have 2 leg spinners in the same 11? Be it Van Der Sey, be it Vyas Kant, at the expense of potentially leaving out someone like a Mahesh Deekshana? Or are we going against the grain by playing 2 leg spinners, even though Hasaranga only bowls his wrong one, so that doesn't quite qualify him as a leg spinner? Would it be weird to have 2 leg spinners in the same playing 11 at home?
Okay, before I answer the question about leg spinners, I just wanted to make a point about what Aravindan said earlier, which right at the start of his statement, which was about the win-loss record and how we're a lot better at home now than even when we were back then, but our away side is really good. And I think that also ties into one of my thoughts, which is that I do think nowadays we have a lot of cricket going on, but I don't think we have a lot of time as fans to actually watch it. I feel like when I was growing up, I felt like the adults around me actually sat and watched cricket. They would sit, the cricket's on, they'll get together. It was a thing. Whereas nowadays, I think culturally we've just sort of moved past it to the point where, like, I'm just going from my anecdotal experience, so feel free to correct me if this is not yours. But like, I'll have like a WhatsApp group with family members, my sisters. Like, in fact, one of our groups is called it's Sri Lanka Cricket Support Group, because that's how we feel, right? That we need we're kind of like all helping each other get through this. And one of the things I noticed is just a lot of people don't. Yeah, they definitely went for the 3rd ODI. Okay, sold out. They went there to watch the game. Second one, they caught the last bit of it. First one, nobody watched, right? And everyone was just like, oh wow, this happened. And then the interest was peaked. Because people have lives, people have things to do. And I think that is maybe kind of tainting the way we consume cricket. Like, I think for us, like, we will, like I've seen Aravinda's work, I've seen Viren, your data work and all that. And clearly there's a lot of analysis and stuff put into that. So you're going through all the data. But I think a lot of people, a lot of fans, they'll just see the result. Oh, right, we lost this many wickets to India again. Oh, we lost this many wickets to India again. And then you would then take it back. Well, that's a collapse. But if you even take those first 3 T20s, could you actually classify the first 2 collapses as your quintessential collapses? Or was it just simply our guys had a platform, they had wickets in hand, and they wanted to really aim for that 200 mark, and they just fell short? Like, our middle order just couldn't pull it off. India bowled well, and our guys just didn't do it well. And yes, the final T20, yes, that was a collapse by any metric. That was terrible. But I think there was a lot of like, I remember seeing message like tweets of people just talking about how this was going to happen before it happened, right? So you have this sort of like self-fulfilling prophecy going on, and I think as fans maybe we need to, or as media personnel also, I think we may take a little bit of the blame and just be like, maybe we need to have a bit more of the sort of points Aravindan was making, right? Because I think at that point, oh, you know what, Sri Lanka is really good at home, but they've been pretty bad abroad. Why is that? Is it because abroad the wickets are different? Maybe that's something to look at, because otherwise what happens is we get into this loop of blaming the coach, blaming the players, select new selectors come in, change players, bring back old players, and then we just go on and on and on. And that's just never a helpful cycle. And I think we're all keeping our fingers crossed that for the next 4 years until this World Cup, that we don't go through another one of those cycles. Because what happens is suddenly someone's going to come in and be like, oh, right, our number 6 isn't working. The number 6 we've been playing for the last couple of years, he's not working. Let's move him out. And something like that would happen. I mean, I hope Sri Lanka gets a good run, but we've done this before where we change captains right before a tournament just because, maybe they're in bad form. But I think we could learn something from the other countries where the successful ones stick to the plan, right? There was a lot of criticism of Pat Cummins coming into the World Cup, right? For his off-field as well as some of his on-field, but he did the job. There was criticism for Darren Sammy when he led West Indies to that title, but they stuck with him for better or worse. And I think, of course, there's differences and everything when it comes to all that. But my final thing would be just, if anyone's listening in, take in all the information, before you put it out there. Oh my God, this is a disgrace. I can't believe this happened. These players are the worst players ever to play. And then suddenly next week, they're the best players ever to play. That's not the case. These are professionals. They're the best in the country at what they do. That's why they're being selected. They try really hard. They work really hard. We know that. But doing all the work and executing the skills, that there's a mental element to it, and we need to support them with that. So yeah, that's what I'll put out there for that. And now just going to your question about the leg spinners, that's actually a very short answer. If Wanidoo improves his batting, I think he can actually play as a lower order batter, and that floating role, I think he's got all the potential in the world. He just needs to work on that, right? He could become Steve Smith came in as a leggy and he barely bowls leg spin, right? And I think Wanidoo's obviously, but I feel like for him to reach his ceiling as a batter is probably easier than him to reach his ceiling as a leg spinner, because there's a lot of data analysis around bowlers, right? They find your weaknesses, and now you can see so many players have gotten so much better at playing Wanidoo. They're picking his googly better, and it's only on some of the slower tracks that he's doing well. He doesn't quite have the variety in terms of speed, trajectory that Rashid has to cause trouble more consistently. And his control is good, but his control with the speed is not quite as good, right? So because of that, like Rashid, it's actually a bit difficult to get him away unless he tosses it up. So I think Wanidoo, maybe you're right. Maybe there is a position to play Van der Sar, or if someone else turns up through the system as the main leg spinner, and then Wanidoo as a batter who also offers leg spin. But that needs all these players to kind of level up. I don't know if the boat has passed on Van der Sar, because this is on very favorable conditions. So we'll have to see how he does on less favorable conditions. But who I do like, and who I do think we need to fit in at all costs, is Lalage. I think the boy's got the mentality. He's hitting. I mean, he got out trying to hit out. He's he needs to work on his power. But I think you send him to whatever gym Patirana has been going to. I think Vellalage will bulk up a bit more. He'll be able to get that strength in his stroke play. But his speeds, he's consistently hitting 90 Ks now. If we can up that to something where like Aksa was hitting about 95, right? So if Vellalage can get into that 85 to 95 range, oof, he's going to be some player because the mentality is there, and the mentality is the hardest thing to coach, and he's had it from the group level. Like you heard him speak at the under 19 World Cup, level head, boys got it. I love him. Fit him into the team. Have him as your. He could be everything. Your primary lower order bat, your primary spinner. You have him as that, and then then we figure out the leg spin stuff. Also on Tikshana, I think on better wickets, like truer batting wickets, we shouldn't even consider him a spinner. We should consider him like a weird seamer sort of option. Like he's not part of our sim category, because he bowls when seamers bowl. He uses drift, which is akin to swing, but I'm not going to get into the technicalities. So he can spin it square on Kettarama, but his career economy rate is very good. And I think if we use him as a bowler that can contain, it'll make every other bowler we have far more effective. So that's where I see that.
Arvind, all yours.
I think if I pick on the leads and the ideas that Madushka gave me in his response, I'm pretty sure that, I probably can speak for another hour, which I'm not going to do. So, but few interesting points. I think Madushka answered your question, Viren, on whether we should play two leg spinners. I'll bring in a new perspective to that. The question is not whether, as he correctly said, the vote is yet to be passed on Van der Sar. We need to be very mindful. This was his day. Whether he would be able to replicate not these sort of performance, decent enough performances consistently, say 45 for 2 in 10 overs on these type of wickets consistently 4 out of 5 times or 4 out of 6 times is yet to be seen. So if that comes to that, then we need to see whether it's Wanindu or Van der Sar who should get the vote. And especially, as Madushka said, we have this, spillover effect from formats. We interpret Wanindu's T20 dominance into ODI. So let's be very objective and go back the last year and see what Wanindu has done in ODIs. Not much significantly, right? I may be wrong, but as the data, I was recollecting when Madushka was saying, I was going through each of these ODIs and whatever, he hasn't done much. The same applies for Tikshana as well. So in reality, the first question you asked, Viren, you mentioned something about how does our spin department stack up in ODIs. Yes, we have Wanindu and Tikshana as lead spinners. And all of a sudden, after this series, Vellalage has got at least 12 to 18 months. As Madushka said, write that name down, irrespective of whatever happens. The guy has all the features. Let's not go there. And so the spin positions are there in the open. But Wanindu, as Madushka said, should focus on his batting. Sometimes he plays like you cannot explain, but we also need to be mindful that at times he has a plan, because in the third T20, Sanath or somebody came up and said they wanted to break the neck of the chase at that point. So he came with the license given to him to go after the bowling, and why they chose to go after the bowling when they could do it in singles, God only knows. Perhaps that's the insecurity, and as much as humorous as it is, it's the insecurity about not getting that single. I mean, right, which Madushka previously said, your brain freezes when you're under pressure. And if you're not getting, what is your default setting? Is it hit out or play the gaps? Probably this generation of players would go for the big shot and try to hit out rather than maneuver the gaps. Because, I mean, as we have been badly influenced by the likes of the people we grew up watching who pierce gaps with ease, right? Mahela with his deft touches, Sangakkara in his own ways, and Deshan to a degree. We have been like, and Angelo when he was in his prime, we have been influenced by that. It's not that easy. So Wanindu has to up his batting game. So the spots are open for grabs. But Viren, knowing Sri Lanka cricket, Madushka, I'm pretty sure you would agree, I don't think none of our selectors will ever play two leg spinners because
No,
we
no.
are so traditional. We
Yeah,
would never do that. And
yeah,
don't be surprised sometimes when Vellalage is playing because he gets the ball into the left hander. We might still not play a leg spinner because you don't want two bowlers turning it into the left
yeah,
hander or probably taking it away from the right hander. That's how conservative we are. Otherwise, why on earth would we play four bowlers when bowling was our strength on those difficult wickets in the World T20? That's what infuriated me. So
yeah,
the answer to that question is probably no. The spin options are up for grabs, and my goodness, Vella, like, yeah, I mean, I will be failing myself if I don't go back on this. Viren, Madushka, I mean, you both would have followed the Under 19 World Cup in 2022, right? Sri Lanka were crumbling
yeah,
against Afghanistan. It was a horror thing, you wake up expecting them to get into semifinals, but here they are crumbling, and this guy stood tall. That was the first time I saw Vellalage. The head on the shoulders absolutely stood out. Came back, scored 100 against South Africa. Then you know what actually caught my attention? He was given a chance for Sri Lanka A against Australia A at SSC, if you remember.
yeah,
And the chase was tight. The game was to be closed. Charmika was at the other end. By that time, Charmika Karunaratne was in the national fray. Vellalage came and closed the innings as if he had done that 10, 15, 20 times. And I'm actually disappointed that his trajectory hasn't gone the way we would have expected from that level. But Madushka, though his power hitting has to improve, I think you would agree on the fact that in the LPL and this, his power hitting and also the repertoire all have improved to a greater degree. So that's work in progress. So lock that
yeah,
number 7 or number 8 for this guy. Back him. Please don't give him the vice captaincy. They can.
yeah.
Don't
They
be
might.
surprised.
Yeah,
Don't do that. Let the
But
guy go. And we would be able to figure out. And I mean, I think another thing, Viren Madushka, which I don't think many people know, is one of the most disappointing factors for me was when Van der Sar was brought in. I was disappointed what happened to Dushan Hemant. He was our
yeah.
choice in the World Cup just not even 1 year ago. And Vyas Kant had been making some rapid strides, and apparently he had a finger injury. He has been battling a finger injury, and that's why he
Okay.
was off color during the LPL,
LPL.
which for some reason didn't come out because I was extremely surprised because the guy was on the verge of a T20 call up if he had done well in the LPL, and apparently he's fighting a ligament or some complex finger injury which has actually come at the wrong
Okay.
time. And I hope these kind of players, different types of players coming, Prabhat might not come into the ODI forum, and we don't have much, but there are two or three spots in the spinning lineup which is up for grabs. And I sincerely hope that all these players in the fray, leg spinners, off spinners, whoever comes and makes it, because one thing we need to be mindful is as we build this team, we need to have good backup options. It's applicable to batting as well as bowling. Now imagine we go to South Africa, we are 2 months away from, or 2 weeks away. Hope it doesn't happen. Pathum Nisanka breaks down. Do we have an option? We need to. If let's say who Kusal Mendes, I hope at that time becomes one of our pivotal pillars. And if he breaks down, do we have an option? Do we have backup options? That's what's going to define our success, not anything else. Because mind you, in the World T20, even on paper, we were a really good team. We didn't have the
Yeah,
depth when it mattered the most. So hope these all are related to the question you asked, but I sincerely hope we make progression in the right direction. And one more thing, Madhushka, you correctly pointed out, we watch cricket in a different way these days, right? People just pick and choose. You don't actually watch the whole thing because you can't. Our lives have
yeah,
changed. But what we get distorted by the fact is that we have beaten South Africa in Sri Lanka. We have beaten Australia in Sri Lanka. Of course, the Afghanistan and Zimbabwe results have influenced us. In 2019, when Bangladesh were good, we had beaten them. In 2020, when West Indies were good, we had beaten them. So, hey, when after Madushka said that, if I take the T20 results out, And on these tracks, probably you should have thought, you should give India a good fight for the money, given all these factors. But we get distorted by the recency of results. So, yeah.
Very well said.
Yeah.
Insightful thoughts and takes there by Madushka and Arvindan on Sri Lanka cricket. I'll wrap up our discussion on Sri Lanka cricket. We'll quickly speak about our noisy neighbours, India, because we have to give them some time on this show as well. But before we get there, the curse on Sri Lankan vice captains, and this took me back to 2011 when I was in the UK following our Sri Lankan team. This was just as Dilshan was appointed captain after the 2011 World Cup. We had Tirina Kandambi on paper, who was our vice captain, but he was on the bench throughout that tour. And it made me realize that the pride that you have in being the Sri Lankan vice captain doesn't really translate to you being a guarantee on the team list. And speaking about Bellalage, a knock that comes to mind was that Premadasa during the Asia Cup, during the group stage against India, following up from his fifer in the first innings. When Sri Lanka, when we had our typical middle order collapse, if I'm not mistaken, Bellalage fell just short of a half century, nearly steadied the ship for us as we got closer to that Indian target. And that was my realization that he had already matured to a level where he could be a constant in our team sheet. Two questions on the Indian team. It's a two-pronged question, and I think it covers a lot. So I'm expecting significantly weighted answers here as well. Firstly, on whether this was a mere blip on the road for Gigi early on in his tenure. And I think a part of that question is also, so Madushka spoke about this earlier, about giving batsmen and giving our players the license to deliver. That means giving them security in terms of not dropping them after one or two poor displays. My reading on the Indian team right now is Gambhir's on the fence in terms of who his favourites are. There's obviously that yearning to pick his KKR boys, the likes of Rinku Singh, Venkatesh Iyer, etc. But he's also trying to facilitate players like Shivam Dube. And we spoke about cross-format selections. Dube has been a maestro in T20 cricket, hasn't quite delivered in List A/ODI cricket, but was given all three matches to try and deliver in this series. Didn't quite work out. Then thinking about players like Akshar Patel, who in my opinion is second to Jadeja to play that same role. So where does he fit in there? So Madushka, do you think there was some experimentation going on with GG, and do you think that's where this result might not be as significant as many Indian fans make it out to be? Or B, do you think there are some serious question marks to be addressed in terms of which players you back and which players you do give a license to?
Well, the first thing I'll say is I'd give the Indian think tank a lot more credit and leeway than I would give if I was judging the Sri Lankan think tank. So a result like this, seeing how they've gone through previous coaches, not just Dravid, because I think Dravid was like very cerebral and like very organized, but before that they had Shastri, they had Kumble. And throughout that, what I've noticed that whether the coach comes in or not, the selections are kind of separate, and there's a thread that runs through them, and they've done pretty well with that. So I know Gigi will definitely have his ideas, and I think him bringing in Pant instead of Rahul for the last game definitely showed that, because Rahul had two bad games prior to that. So I saw some commenters saying that maybe Dravid would have persisted with Rahul, right, instead of Pant in that position. But I think, listen, Rishabh Pant's been out for several years. This is his first ODI back. You need to give him you need to give him game time. You can't bring him on tour and then not play him. So they gave him the game. And on a surface like that, if you saw the way Rohit Sharma batted compared to pretty much anyone else, the only other guy you would think is probably capable of doing something similar is Rishabh Pant. So I understood the thinking, right? Obviously, he's been out of the game for ages, so he was out of it. But I understood the thinking of why they had him. And if you saw the shot he got out to, right, it was very clear what he was told to do. He was told to just go out there and he was done in by I think it was Teekshana,
Yeah.
who saw him coming. A lovely bit of overspin. The ball drift. It dipped. It just didn't. He was left out in the cold. But in terms of India, I don't think they'll be panicking here. If you look at the discourse after the game, it wasn't about even, oh, we need to like look at our mentality. We need no, none of that. None of that. No talk about intangibles. The one thing I like about these top sides like India is they talk about things, very specific things. What did we do bad? We didn't sweep. They didn't speak about anything else. Rohit was like, we didn't sweep well, and we need to be sweeping well. And I love that. I love that because that he saw a problem. The problem was they couldn't play spin. Why didn't they play spin? Because they didn't utilize one of the shots that pretty much any visiting team, I think a few years back before the 2019 World Cup, England came down. And I remember they just dominated us. They like Moeen Ali and Rashid. Sorry, yeah, Moeen and Rashid just completely uh, outpoled our spinners, and their batters just used their feet and just swept and swept and swept. Reverse sweep, conventional sweep, you name it, they used it. And it was just there was nothing our guys could do because none of the players who play like I mean I remember Prabhat trying to bowl in that series and so on. Like there was nothing he could do because it's not something that's utilized even by our batters in domestic cricket. They don't utilize the sweep as much because they learn to play it in different ways, right? And I think that's something I don't think India will be too worried. But it'll be very interesting to see because Gigi is definitely probably the most abrasive coach India have hired in quite some time. That like he can be a little bit, maybe he can get into a bit of war words with higher ups. I don't know, but this is all like going on his personality outside of it, right? Because you see him say shit from time to time. But I wouldn't worry so much because I don't think you can read like it's like if they went to Bangladesh, like Arvind very clearly pointed out, like you go to Mirpur and you get bowled over. I don't think you're going to be worrying so much about it. But at the same time, they're perfectionists. Rohit will not have been happy with that performance. Like you don't want to lose. If you're world champions, you just won a T20. You made the World Cup of the ODI World Cup, like the final of the ODI World Cup. You don't want to lose, and you don't want to lose like that. It feels bad because yes, you can make excuses, but I don't think this Indian side get to where they are, that mentality, by making excuses. I don't think they're sitting there thinking, oh, don't worry about it, we just lost. They're unhappy. They're not happy they lost, and they will want to be better. And if we play them again in a bilateral series in Sri Lanka at Kettarama in the next however many years, mark my words, that performance is going to be way better than this. They're going to be sweeping the hell out of our boys, and we better come up with strategies to combat that. So that's what I'll say on that.
Well said. Arvind?
Yeah, I think as Madushka correctly pointed out, Rohit's responses is a benchmark for us to see what has driven them to where they are. He could have mentioned about the conditions. He could have come up with excuses and said, we are not going to encounter these types of wickets. Probably the chance of them encountering a wicket like this in an ICC tournament, which matters in the ODI format, is absolutely near nil, right? So in that kind of a context, he could have come up with any excuse. But as Madushka said, he knew where it went wrong. He went down to the specifics, and it's a reflection of what they were talking. What didn't we do? We were not sweeping well. So they are learning from it, and that's what has brought them where they are. And about how they would view this, probably as you correctly pointed out, wherein they were looking at their depth. Will Dubey play? Will Aksa be a good choice instead of Jadeja? So they tried out certain options in critical positions. It didn't work out. And maybe it's very difficult to judge as well because, these are not the kind of conditions they are going to encounter. And most importantly, I felt the call to play Pant, Madushka nailed it. Did you see the way he got off the mark? Against the spin, I don't remember who it was against. Was it against Tikshana, if I'm right? Like,
Yeah, I think it was Tikshana.
Ball spinning away between mid-wicket and mid-on. I thought, when I saw that shot, I was visualizing this guy coming down and taking Vella Alage to the cleaners. You saw how he took Moeen Ali down on the Indian tour, right? Basically in Chennai, if I remember right. I think that was the plan, and luckily, Thikshana outsmarted him. So these are things which probably they wouldn't read too much into, and they have another 3 games, right? I don't know against whom before their Champions Trophy. Hopefully, I mean, probably not in Pakistan that we could be sure of. So they tried out a few things, and he's also aware of the fact that he has inherited a good team. So I hope he won't be meddling around too much with. So probably India's quest to win the Champions Trophy is what will be driving them right now. But it's going to be interesting times because, as you pointed out, Gambhir is an eccentric character, but he has been successful. He has been successful. You saw the magic he weaved with Lucknow Super Giants. Very decent. KKR. So how it turns out. But as Madushka said, I hope we don't play India anytime soon in Sri Lanka. We need some time to bask in this glory, and especially not in India. I sincerely hope that Jai Shah doesn't fire a call to Shami and say, "You look, you guys are not playing the Champions Trophy. Why don't you come and give us some warm up?" I mean, no, don't want that trauma. Let us bask in this.
That call might be coming. Actually, it'll be very
Might
interesting.
come. Please don't answer.
We're deep into extra time now on the show. The final question for both my commented panelists, Manushka and Arvind, and I wanted some controversy towards the end, which is why this is the final show, the final question rather. I termed the Indian team as being ruthless perfectionists, as Madushka said. During a pre-series show on an Indian channel called The Fifth Umpire, and this is where I think my question on Virat Kohli comes in. He's retired from T20 cricket. And in my view, I think he'll continue playing Test cricket for as long as he can, because I don't see a replacement for Virat in the longest format of the game. But this is the format where he made his mark. He was a 50-over specialist. The specialist, maybe the greatest ever chaser of all time in terms of the numbers he's delivered during high-pressure situations and scenarios in this game. Do you think, not just basing it off this series, but basing it off the past few series, including a bit of a barren run in the lead up to the World Cup in 2023, do you reckon it's time for Virat to reconsider his place in the Indian ODI outfit? And the reason I'm asking you this question is because you have players in the wings like Sanju Samson, Abhishek Sharma, Riyan Parag, who are all more than willing to come in and deliver on their day. We know the off-field antics between Gambhir and Virat, and I don't think that will be a significant factor going forward. But do you think it's time for India to look past Virat Kohli, or should he be given a slightly longer string in terms of regaining some form?
Is his form bad? I mean, I know his strike rate's probably not as high as what's been expected in modern day cricket. So I'll say that. But it's all about team balance, right? And I think if India ever finds themselves questioning that team balance, maybe Virat is not the right guy. But right now they've got Rohit at the top of the order doing Rohit things where, for me, what Rohit Sharma is doing now is probably the closest thing in modern cricket to what the likes of Jayasuriya did when they came in that first 15 overs and then save up. Just because it's in comparison to what everyone else is able to do, and the consistency at what Rohit does it. So he's taking the pressure off, right? And what I think that does, and that's what was so well highlighted in the 2023 World Cup, was that once Rohit lays that platform, it gives Virat ample time to not settle in. He doesn't need to settle in, but he doesn't need to take risks, because there was a time that Virat was the primary risk taker. Like, he'd come in and he just one down, absolutely go after all the bowling. Like Lasith Malinga will attest to that. So these are things that Virat used to do. But right now, I feel like what Virat's been asked to do is, like, you need to be there. You've got these young guys who are capable of doing all these different things. Virat, you play your game, and then when you need to pick it up, you pick it up. Because I'm just going through his recent scores. So obviously this series hasn't been great, but like his World Cup, I didn't actually realize how good his World Cup was. Like these are the scores: 54, 117, 51, 101, 88, 0, 95, 103, and then 16, 55, 85, 56. I mean, I'm just going back, and it's just like if how that is an astonishing level of consistency. And yeah, it's Virat, man. He's fit. He's in terms of how he takes care of his body. The only other sportsman I can like probably compare him to is like a Novak Djokovic. It's just my body is my temple. Look after it. He's 35, but he looks like he's still 30, right? So he'll be 39 by the time the next World Cup comes around. I think he's one of those guys. Tendulkar how old was Tendulkar when he won the World Cup in 2011? He was nearing
38.
40, right? 38,
30,
right?
38.
So Virat will be 39 by the time the 2027 World Cup rolls around. I think unless his form goes off a cliff, you need to have that profile within the squad, because he's the guy that if you're in a chase and you've got Virat Kohli in the middle, you're not like even in that last ODI, until Virat got out, I wasn't really confident about where this game was heading. And I think the way Virat himself kind of brought it on himself, because he had gone after our players on the field. He was a bit overly excitable as Virat can get. So Sabir gave it back to him, I think, when the wicket went. But generally speaking, yeah, Virat's the guy, right? Virat. I don't think you can justify dropping him. You just have to. You have that. He is. If an ODI side needs an anchor, you cannot find one that's better than Virat Kohli right now, because an anchor is not going to score at above 100 consistently, but an anchor is just consistently going to be there. And when he needs to up his strike rate, he will. And I think, Virat. Sorry, I will not be dropping Virat Kohli if I was in the team.
A fitting tribute to Virat there by Madushka. Arvindan, your take.
Absolutely aligned with what Madushka said. So I'll just sum it up in the interest of time, Viren. Knowing Virat, how close Indian cricket is to him, and how dedicated he has been to Indian cricket, I don't think he will let it get to that stage where somebody would have to drop him. He would walk off. That's how I think he will go on his own terms, not because of the ego of him wanting to go out on his own terms. I see him as a great who puts the team before himself. And if he feels, and the professional that he is, he would be able to see that coming even before any of the others are able to see that coming, and he would sign off before that. So I would, in a way, I would say he would exit like Sachin, because nobody would have asked Sachin to sign off, but Sachin held on for a little too long for some reason. We do not know. I mean, 2011 was his time to sign off in style. He didn't, and then he retrospectively retired after the Asia Cup in 2012. Virat would do, and as Madushka said, he's one of the most fittest, and I don't see, even when he's 39, we saw Shahid Afridi, Misbah ul Haq, and enough and more players play until 39, 40, right? So Virat, it will be a breeze for Virat, unless, of course, maybe a vision related or a reflex related problem that cannot be addressed by external interventions comes in, because his fitness is so good, that his base is so brilliant, none of those would be a problem. And I mean, looking at the way Rohit is playing, won't be surprised it will be two extreme type of players excelling in their late 30s. Could be a possibility. So Viren, again, my vote is with Madushka. I would not even think of dropping Virat. I mean, spare the guy a little bit, right? He was in UK holidaying, getting away from all the attention. And Gigi came in and asked him to come and play ODI series. So probably you could giving something. And I pity the next opposition who are up against India, because he would definitely be proving a point in the next series.
Form is temporary, class is permanent. But where Virat's concerned, form is irrelevant and class is still permanent. Thanks, Madushka. Thanks, Arvind. That was a stellar show. We went deep into injury time there, so apologies for going a tad overboard. We'll be back hopefully to preview the England-Sri Lanka Test series, time permitting, of course. It was an honor having you with us, Madushka. Looking forward to having you on board on many more occasions going forward.
Right. Thanks for having me. Nice chatting with you as well, Viren and Aravindan. So yeah, let's do this again soon.
Thanks, Arvind. Thanks, Madushka.
Thank you. See you.